Hi, I'm James Kahn, and these are my stories. Except this is actually Bob Murphy's story. Bob Murphy, rest in peace, was born in 1950, just a few months after his father had been shipped off to the Korean War, never to return. My old man ran away, is how Murphy framed it, and running away became part of Murphy's story. He ran away from home when he was 10, hung out at the stock car races until a security guard collared him and took him home. He liked the feeling of wild, though, so he kept upping the ante. He was cutting classes and making out with girls behind the gym when he was 11. When he was 13, he put the make on a 20-year-old sales girl at Woolworth's and got lucky. By the next year, he'd learned how to hotwire cars and stolen his first one. He used to go joyriding all night with his buddies, and then they'd leave the car in some parking lot in the morning. He was what was called in those olden days a juvenile delinquent. His third conviction, age 18, the judge said, "Son, Joliet prison or Vietnam, take your pick." Murphy knew all the stories about what happened to good-looking young guys at Joliet, so he picked the Army. And with everything he knew about cars, he figured he had a lock on working the motor pool. He had it wired. Wasn't like that, though. He got wounded the first time by an enemy grenade during an Agent Orange defoliation mission. His unit was clearing a perimeter around a jungle area the Viet Cong inhabited, while U.S. aircraft was sent to spread these billowing, chemical, herbicidal orange clouds down to kill all the foliage, depriving the enemy of concealment. Unfortunately, all that dioxin was also carcinogenic, mutagenic, and every other kind of genic bad for human life. Murphy's grenade injury, however, was minor. Bought him a week of R&R in Tokyo, where he got a case of the clap, got a shot of penicillin, and got sent back into the fray. Into the fray meant getting choppered into a firefight and told to hold that hill. But on the way there, inside the Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter, known as the Huey, Murphy had a bad feeling about the mission, and so did everyone else. One guy was quietly crying, a few were smoking dope. Murphy took a hit or two himself. One wild man was tripping on acid, Jimi Hendrix wailing from his boombox, "Purple haze all in my brain." The sour smell filled the air as someone losing bowel control. Now and then bullets would ping off the armor plating on the fuselage, and everyone would jump. There was one guy, though, cool as you please, his M16 at parade rest like he was on a downtown bus just headed home for supper. Murphy focused on him to calm down. As they approached the drop zone, the rounds hitting the chopper were getting more frequent, and Murphy's teeth started chattering. He clenched his jaw to stop it, and bit his lip hard so he could just fixate on the pain instead of on all those freaked-out, doped-up, well-armed teenagers. Pretty soon, bullets were smacking all over the hull. It sounded like popcorn crackling in an iron pot, stuttering all over the big door everyone was going to run out of when they landed. And Murphy remembered thinking, "Shit, I'm going to die." They thudded hard on the ground, the door slid open. Everyone poured out, and the first few were immediately hit by gunfire spraying the exit, dead on the spot. Murphy and the rest scattered to the top of a flattened-off hill, reinforcing 20 others pinned there. Braced by adrenaline, they laid a steady barrage of fire down the hillside at the enemy below. But one grunt hadn't gotten off the helicopter. That same cool kid, the bus rider, the guy who seemed like he was just passing time a few minutes ago. Now he couldn't make that leap into this new reality. He leveled his carbine at the pilot and said, "I'm going home." The agreeable pilot lifted off, leaving Murphy and his band of brothers to hold that hill. Hunkering down in a ditch that ran around half the edge of the hilltop, he felt like he couldn't get enough air, and he wondered if he'd been hit. He checked his chest, no bullet holes, and he had a long, incandescent moment of terror, convinced he'd forgotten how to breathe. That made him laugh, though, a thin laugh, but enough to put some air in his lungs and put him back into his body, just in time to see the chopper lift off, like his last hope. He looked around to get the lay of the land. 30 men, more or less, crouched around the rim of the hilltop like charms on a bracelet, some lying flat in dead brush, some in dugout trenches, some behind the crumbling low walls of what used to be a small brick building of some kind, church maybe, all firing down the grade at the advancing enemy. And they were advancing. Murphy could see now there were hundreds of Viet Cong regulars, hundreds, mind you, completely encircling the hill, crawling or crab-walking steadily up, foot by foot, blasting away as they came with rifles, machine guns, even some bigger ordnance. Maybe 100 yards below the crest when Murphy first looked down. He hunched even lower. He didn't want to expose himself to those incoming rounds, and he came face to face with a dead man to his left. A dead boy, really, just staring at him. If you've ever been stared at up close by a dead body, you've known that look they have about them, like they have a secret, terrible knowledge, a kind of bottomless emptiness that's both inviting and accusing. It's hard to withstand the pressure of that icy gaze. Murphy turned away and discovered on his right a box full of grenades. Eureka! With a giddy sense of despair, he began pulling the pins and lobbing them over his head down the hill, back over his shoulder, and with his back to the attack, he saw his comrades all firing down from their positions. He tried hard to remember what they looked like. It seemed important to remember. And the thought came to him out of nowhere that he was sorry he'd stolen all those cars. As his grenades began running low, he glanced back down the hill again. And now the approaching troops were just 20 yards away. Murphy began to shiver. He knew that in a few minutes, regardless of whether he was wounded, surrendering, begging, or dead, his head would be cut off. That was just the local custom. A medic told him once that during the French Revolution, Dr. Guillotine, the guy who'd invented the guillotine, had come up with an experiment. He made a pact with the victim that after they'd been beheaded, he would ask their bodiless heads yes/no questions. And if they could, their severed heads would respond. 1 blink for yes, 2 blinks for no. Are you in pain? Were you innocent? Were you guilty? Are you sorry for your crime? Guillotine learned that those disembodied heads were able to reply coherently for up to 40 seconds. That meant 40 seconds of Murphy's own head rolling in the dirt, watching his own headless corpse twitch, watching his buddies decapitated and impaled, watching his life scream away, and he couldn't stand that thought. He just plain couldn't stand it. So he drew his .45 Army Colt automatic from his holster and looked at it with a dark understanding, with a violent wind in his ears. He tried to think of his childhood, tried to imagine his father, tried to reclaim the wild, stolen passion of his first love with the clerk at Woolworth's and the wild, stolen glee of his first hot car. He wanted something good to take with him wherever he was going. He put the gun to his ear and looked across the bloody crater that would be his grave, wondering if anyone else was contemplating what he was. And he saw, just 40 feet away, the hill was already being overrun. Hand-to-hand combat, bayonets in the belly, slit throats, and without thinking, Murphy jumped up and ran down the hillside. He ran right past the line of North Vietnamese who were charging up the hill, ran past them and kept running. A few of them turned and fired at him. He was hit in the upper back, but he just kept on running. Nobody had much interest in chasing him. The action was all at the top of the hill, and he'd likely die soon of blood loss anyway. He ran for an hour, though, and sent up a flare when he heard the characteristic sweet sounds of a Huey rotor blade in the distance. The chopper found him and medevaced him back to Saigon, where he was given a Purple Heart and a ticket home. Lying in the hospital, he said he thought a bit about bravery and cowardice. Both he and that grunt who'd forced the pilot to fly back to base, they'd both run. But now Murphy had a medal and the other guy had 2 years at Leavenworth. What made them different? Murphy had stared death in the face, while the other poor sap had just heard the Reaper knocking at the door, like popcorn in an iron pot. Murphy couldn't figure it. An intense moment, you react without thinking, it changes you, but you don't know how. So later you try to name it, to impose some kind of fragile order on the chaos. Philosophy 101, and Murphy was never much of a philosopher. He just got on with his life. Ended up going to medical school. Nobody saw that coming. He became an anesthesiologist and did moonlighting shifts in the ER. That's where I knew him. That's where he told me these stories, his war stories. He was a funny, manic, troubled, nerve-wracked guy. But then again, something like that happens to you, he said. It colors your life. In his case, turns out, colored it orange. In 1985, he developed a retroperitoneal cancer known to be caused by Agent Orange, the stuff he'd had to breathe in while he was out on that first mission. It took almost a year for the cancer to spread to his brain, so ultimately he couldn't speak. He could only lie on his deathbed, 1 blink for yes, 2 blinks for no. Am I innocent? Am I guilty? Am I scared? Am I in pain? And wonder why this guillotine blade had taken 20 years to fall, cutting his wild life down to a hilltop the size of a hospital bed. Robert Murphy, R.I.P., 1950 to 1986, no longer in pain.